comment on the issue. And I think Michael Kelly's piece it seemed to hammer home to me this idea I've been talking about divisiveness. A no vote would be a great thing because it would really piss the SNP off, and then eventually we can go and take back powers, because that would really piss the SNP off too. And I just find it an incredibly narrow. And if you're talking about grievance politics, to me that's really, really rooted in a grievance politics. It's rooted in a grievance that Labour have lost power. It's rooted in a grievance that we've lost lots of voters to the SNP. It's not rooted in any way of how do we get these voters back, or why we've lost these voters, or why the SNP have been successful, despite the fact that, as we can see, some people don't actually support their flagship policy, probably even within the party, to be honest, about independence. But yet they are far more successful than Labour in terms of getting votes, especially at devolved elections. And I found that piece in particular just empty and spiteful.
There you are.
Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a historical, well-known strain in the Labour Party, which has been profoundly hostile to devolution. I mean, that's an important part of it, and an important part of kind of Labour's devolution story, if you like. And, the idea that we are the party of devolution is a very compressed version of the party's history and leaves out important strains of it, including Michael Kelly. As Peter was saying, though, I mean, Michael Kelly is, in a sense, I don't think necessarily one can deduce much about Labour Party politics in the broad contemporary sense from what Michael Kelly believes. I mean, because he is a committed partisan who's, let's face it, pretty much past it. And does anyone in the Labour Party likely to give much of a fig what he thinks? I think it's easy to overstate, and I mean, the SNP, for example, was gleefully putting out one of its lovely partisan news releases saying, this proves that the only way to get more powers is to vote yes, which isn't, I think, true. I understand what the argument is. I understand that it's an argument that the best way to deliver more powers might be to have independence. But I think to say that it's the only way is a bit of an overstatement for me.
Well, I'm a Glaswegian, an independent supporter, and a Celtic supporter, so I've got a hat trick of reasons for not liking Michael Kelly. But don't you think this is kind of kamikaze politics? I mean, if you really support the Union, and all of the polls suggest that Scottish people want more power, whether that be with independence or not, to come out and make the referendum an all or nothing kind of shout, even if people aren't listening to him. Do you not think that's kind of kamikaze stuff, Peter?
I don't know. Again, I think we follow these things or write these things, have a slightly overinflated sense of our potential to influence debate. I know I said before that the media does make a difference. I think the media does make a difference, but what really makes a difference is what's at the top of the 6 o'clock news, or the 6:30 news, or the 10 o'clock news. Not what's in the column, on the back pages of the opinion pages of a kind of a broadsheet newspaper. I don't think it'll help the cause particularly, but I don't think it's some huge dent in that Better Together are going to be kind of sitting around going, what are we going to do about this? I think Andrew's right. It probably speaks more about the writer's own particular, I don't know if you want to call it journey or lack thereof, and his own political. I don't think this is what the Labour Party are going to be campaigning on. But on a wider thing, I do think it flags up some of the policy vacuum in the Labour. And there is divisions within the Labour Party about where to go from here. There is certainly a strain who do think that George Robinson has been proved categorically wrong about devolution and nationalism, and that Holyrood is a worrying development. But I don't see, not just these polls, I've yet to see any poll that people really do want retrenchment of power from Holyrood.
Well, it's actually an interesting point there. It was one of the other things that was in this recent Panelbase poll, which asked whether people thought that the powers of the Parliament should be reduced and whether they were likely to be reduced. And only 6% of people that responded said that they thought it should be reduced. But interestingly, if you look at the kind of post-2014 question, where 19% thought it was likely that Holyrood's powers would be diminished as a consequence of the no vote, presumably by subsequent legislative action, which I think is an interesting detail, which might suggest, at least for a percentage of the population, it might be more of an anxiety than maybe my initial response admitted.
I think with the Machiavellian hat on, they might introduce a a Westminster law saying only Westminster can decide future referendums. I think you could expect that kind of thing.
Well, that's legally that's already the case, because the only reason why this legislation is clearly legal is because of the Section 30 order, which runs out by the end of 2014. So in the sense the question if there's going to be a future independence referendum at some future point, then Westminster is likely to have to be involved again. Peter, you were going to say something. Sorry.
Well, I think something similar. The Quebec situation is not dissimilar to that in terms of the parallels between the 1980 and the 1995. And I could be wrong, but I think after 1995, the Canadian government has basically stepped in, and I could be completely wrong on this, but I don't think Quebec is actually able to unilaterally hold a referendum on independence anymore.
Well, I don't know about that so much. I know there was something called the Clarity Act, I think it was called, which was about the sort of terms and conditions of it and the sort of types of questions that might be asked and so on. I mean, I think it's still arguable, but because of the sort of Section 30 order and the Scottish Government agreeing to it, I think it'd be much harder for a future pro-independence Scottish Government to argue that Holyrood inherently has the power to hold a referendum on independence. Now, I think that argument is significantly weakened by this sort of recent process of sort of explicitly transferring the powers. But I suppose, I mean, that's a question which some people are asking. And again, a funny one. I mean, to go back to what you were saying earlier about personalisation, Peter, people are asking the First Minister to make comments about what a future pro-independence, whether SNP or Green or heaven knows Scottish Socialist party might take power in Scotland, and asking him to make sort of conviction statements about whether there'd be another referendum and whether he'd rule one out. And you think, well, it's not about him. It's not about individual sort of claims, and this idea that it's all about the grand sway of the historical figure. It's just absurd and actually quite insulting to democracy, that it's not just a question of sort of vapid celebrity and sort of personalization in that way, that I think it's quite damaging for how we all think about politics and how we talk about it and what we expect from it.
At the same time, the most recent poll said that for the next Holyrood election, the SNP will be back with an increased majority. So I suppose there is, in some senses, a case for him answering that question in that way.
Well, I suppose that's true. I mean, because in the recent Panelbase poll, the SNP polled 48%. Personally, my interpretation of that would be to say that essentially that is a reflection on Labour. That's a kind of I don't think that is high levels of enthusiasm. I think that's kind of steady as she goes, and no one else is remotely plausible in office. Joanne Lamont isn't plausible in office. Her shadow cabinet aren't getting the kind of purchase in the public consciousness which will be necessary, and they don't have the kind of policies fundamentally to carry them anywhere near Butte House at the moment. But still, I mean, as one of my other friends was remarking, it is very striking that a government in its second term is polling at 48%. Even if you think that's on the high side, and I suspect it probably is. I mean, you could knock 10 points off that, and I'd still be quite happy. I don't know if you saw that, Peter. What you make of that kind of curiosity about why the SNP still seem to be riding so high?
Yeah, because I must say, I for one had fairly assumed that one of the flaws of having a September 2014 referendum is by then the SNP would have been in power for 7 years, which is a long time, and generally in most democratic polities, two terms is as much as a party gets. New Labour got 3, the Thatcher got 3, but if across the board, across other jurisdictions as well, a certain fatigue sets in after around 7 years. But I think the SNP have been helped hugely by Labour's lack of policy. It's very hard to see. I think they do not look like even a devolved government in waiting.
Peter, whilst we're on the subject of SNP and salmon, can I ask you why you think Scottish culture must be kept separate from the independence push?
Oh, this is the Huffington Post article.
Oh, yes.
If you can divine some logic in that piece that I can have an argument about, please explain it to me, and then we can have the argument. I would struggle to say anything more than Jesus, Mary, and Joseph chain.
Well, the most I got from it was that she doesn't like it when people bring up Alex Salmond to her, I think was the point of it.
I didn't see this. Could one of you sort of summarize for me what this egregious piece of writing sort of contended? Because I think I must have missed it. And it's impossible to summarize.
Basically, she said that...
It's.
Yeah, go for it, Peter.
Well, I think basically that Scotland, there should be no discussion of culture in the referendum because that will divide Scotland. And that's about as far as I could get, really, and that she doesn't like Alex Salmond.
Yeah, and because people used to ask her about Scotland and say, what about this Scottish band, and where's Byers Road? People talk about it. And now they talk about Alex Salmond. That's bad for her living in London, so we need to keep Scottish culture separate from the referendum debate. It's slightly mad.
It's not one of the most well thought out, but it did flag up a certain metropolitan look on Scotland, and I have to say, as someone who does spend a good bit of time in London, there is a kind of a what's happening in Scotland, and not a huge desire to really engage with it, but a kind of a what is this? These crazy Scots, what are they doing? This is all a bit silly, really, isn't it? And why would you really care about it? And I guess it also flags up a kind of a wider. Politics isn't very. Politics is certainly something that people are increasingly. If you look at the kind of the Hansard Society's audit of democratic, or the audit of political engagement, is it called, that comes out every year, and it does show that people are becoming increasingly kind of put off by politics. They're tuning off from politics. So, and I think for a lot of people, especially kind of a metropolitan elite, which it's a cliche, but there is some truth to it. Like if within the opinion formers of the UK. The idea of really being completely engaged with some sort of political process is a bit naff and a bit uncool. And that piece kind of came from that kind of, why would you really want to care? That's such a, it's, people used to talk to me about your Jesus and Mary chain, but now they're just talking to you about Alex Salmond. And the girl also didn't look very old. So notice the Jesus and Mary chain haven't really done very much of note for about 20 years. And please, Jesus and Mary chain fans, don't start writing into me, but it's a fair comment. If that's the height of contemporary Scottish culture, we probably do need some sort of a fresh think on it.
Although there was a good response to it by Jenny Lindsay on National Collective, which I thought was very well written and very well done. And to be fair to the woman who wrote the original article on Huffington Post, she accepted it in good grace, because she probably didn't have many other options, but there you go.
Well, it is. It's also the Huffington Post. It's particular, I guess it comes to journalism as well. The Huffington Post doesn't pay people. It wants this kind of link bait. It wants something, to be honest, it almost suits the purposes of organisations like that to have some well-written, intelligent comment, yes, but also to have far-out son of lung lunacy or badly written nonsense where people will coalesce around it and it'll get, hundreds of thousands of clicks, and there comes money. And if you don't pay the writer, the money goes to the organisation, so they win.
Yeah.
Is there something which interests me, and it has come up a wee bit, but it is on to take the post sort of seriously, maybe, or maybe what it gestures towards, which is about the issue of culture. Because there is definitely a strain of sort of the contemporary sort of Scottish nationalist, but maybe sort of pro-independence argument as well, which is very much anxious and wants to downplay anything which smacks of culture a lot, because culture begins to have the sort of feel for some people, I suppose, of the more ethnic argument, maybe a bit less civic. I don't think it has to be, but there is this sort of anxiety, I think, about a primarily cultural argument for Scottish independence, and I frankly have never really heard one recently. And I wonder, maybe it points towards an anxiety which may be actually quite recognisable for some Scotnads. I don't know if what either of you think about that.
Well, I think the SNP have to be very, very careful about that. Like, when Peter said earlier in the show about the SNP have had to keep a very level head on things, they seem to don't want to rock the boat with their policies. However, in the other side of the Yes debate, in the forums and in the Women for Indie groups and in the radical indie groups, there are these discussions going on, but not in the mainstream. And it's the same kind of thing with this kind of cultural element to the debate. I don't think the SNP, in their position, an official Yes campaign, can come out with that stuff. I think they have to keep it on economics, the political and economic sense that independence would make. But at the margins, all the other groups can come out with this kind of cultural element. I think the official Yes campaign should be very, very wary about going into that. Although I think free rein should be given to other groups to come out with it.
Well, just to give you one wee example, just off the top of my head while I remember it. Do you remember when McGrahy was released and Kenny McCaskill made a few his quite intense remarks about it, and he referred to sort of Scottish values of compassion. And what was funny was that if you looked like online, and many of the sort of, I suppose you might describe them as broadly indie skeptical, but not sort of rampant out and out unionists who took this in, and not necessarily